Before the fire went out, that's when the best stories were told. Before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Folklore Crypt. It helps keep these stories alive and brings more folklore to your nights. And tell me, what time is it where you are right now? Drop it in the comments. I love knowing when and where around the world these stories find you. Welcome. I'm glad you are here with me tonight. Tonight, we journey to West Africa, to the villages where the elders gather children around the fire as darkness falls, where stories are not just entertainment, but lessons, warnings, wisdom passed down through countless generations, where the cleverest creature is not the lion or the elephant, but a small spider named Anansi. These are the old tales, the ones that explain why things are the way they are, why spiders look the way they do, why certain animals behave in certain ways, why cleverness sometimes comes with a price. Let the fire crackle. Let your breathing slow. Let these ancient voices carry you somewhere else. We begin with Anansi, the trickster, the clever one, the spider who wanted everything and learned that wanting everything often leaves you with less than you started with. In the old days, longer ago than anyone can remember, Anansi the spider did not look the way he looks today. He was round, well-fed. His body was plump and comfortable. He moved through the world with the satisfaction of someone who always got what he wanted. And what Anansi wanted more than anything was food. Not just any food, the best food, the richest stews, the sweetest fruits, the most carefully prepared dishes. Anansi spent his days thinking about meals, planning them, scheming ways to be invited to as many feasts as possible. One morning, Anansi woke to a wonderful smell. His neighbor was cooking. The rich aroma of groundnut soup drifted through the air. His stomach rumbled. He went to his neighbor's house, knocked on the door. "Ah, Anansi," his neighbor said, "I'm preparing a feast, but it won't be ready until this evening. Come back then." Anansi agreed and returned home, but he was restless. That soup smelled too good to wait for. Then he smelled something else from a different direction. Another neighbor was cooking palm nut stew, even more delicious. Anansi went to that neighbor's house, was told the same thing. "Come back this evening. The food will be ready then." He returned home, but now his mind was racing. 2 feasts, both happening tonight, both promising the most delicious food. Then he smelt a third aroma, fufu being pounded, the rhythmic sound of the pestle hitting the mortar. His mouth watered. A third neighbor, a third feast, also tonight. Anansi sat in his house, overwhelmed. 3 feasts, 3 incredible meals, all at the same time. How could he possibly attend all 3? Then, because Anansi was clever, he had an idea. He went to his wife and asked her to spin thread, strong thread, the longest thread she could make. His wife, used to his strange requests, did as he asked. Anansi took the thread and divided it into 3 pieces. He tied one end of the first thread around his waist. Then he took that thread to his first neighbor's house. "When the food is ready," he said, "pull this thread. I'll feel it and come immediately." He did the same with the second thread, tied it around his waist, took it to the second neighbor. And the same with the third thread, around his waist to the third neighbor. Now, Anansi thought, I can attend all 3 feasts. Whoever pulls their thread first, that's where I'll go. Then I'll visit the others after. He went home and waited, the 3 threads tied around his middle, each one leading to a different feast, each one promising to pull him toward abundance. He waited and waited, his stomach growling, his mind imagining each delicious dish. Then something happened that Anansi had not considered. All 3 neighbors finished cooking at exactly the same time. All 3 pulled their threads at once. Anansi felt the pull, not from one direction, from 3 directions simultaneously. The threads tightened around his waist, pulling hard. He tried to stand, tried to move toward one feast or another, but the threads held him, each one pulling with equal force, each one dragging him in different directions. He couldn't move forward, couldn't move back. The threads just pulled tighter and tighter and tighter. His waist began to shrink, squeezed by the 3 threads, pulled from 3 directions at once. By the time Anansi managed to cut himself free, the damage was done. His waist had been pulled so thin it would never return to its original size. Where once he'd been round and plump, now his body was divided. A large front section, a large back section, and between them, the thinnest waist you've ever seen. The feasts went on without him. He arrived at each house too late. The food was gone, eaten by guests who had actually shown up on time, guests who hadn't tried to attend 3 feasts at once. Anansi went home hungry, his waist permanently thin, a reminder of his greed, a reminder that trying to have everything often means you end up with nothing. And that is why, to this day, spiders have thin waists. You can see it on every spider you encounter. That narrow connection between body and abdomen, the mark of Anansi's greed, the price of wanting too much. The elders say this story teaches that greed empties the hands, but it also teaches something else, that cleverness without wisdom is just elaborate foolishness, that Anansi's schemes often trapped himself more than they trapped others. But do not think that this experience taught Anansi to be less greedy. Do not think he learned his lesson and became content with simple meals and honest work. No, Anansi remained Anansi, the trickster, the schemer, the one who always thought he could outsmart the world. There are so many stories about Anansi. So many times his cleverness worked. So many times it backfired. The tales are countless as the stars. Let me tell you another one that happened long before the thin waist, back when Anansi was young and the world was even younger. In those days, there were no stories, not the way we know them now. Stories existed, yes, but they belonged to Nyame, the sky god, the one who owned everything in the heavens. All the stories in the world were kept in a golden box at Nyame's feet, locked away, guarded. Stories of how the world began, stories of animals and people, stories of magic and wisdom and foolishness, and no one on earth had ever heard. The people and animals lived without stories. They had nothing to tell around the fire, nothing to teach their children, nothing to explain why things were the way they were. They simply existed, worked, slept, without the comfort of tales. without the wisdom of narratives passed down. But Anansi, even then, understood the value of stories. He knew that whoever controlled the stories controlled something precious, something that could make him important, respected, remembered. So Anansi decided he would get the stories from Iyami. He climbed to the sky, found Iyami sitting on his throne, the golden box of stories at his feet. "Great Iyami," Anansi said, bowing low. "I have come to buy your stories." Iyami looked at the small spider before him and laughed, a sound like thunder rolling across the heavens. "Buy my stories? Many have tried. Great chiefs, powerful warriors, rich men with gold, all have failed. What makes you think you can afford them?" "Name your price," Anansi said. "Whatever it is, I will pay it." Iyami considered. He was curious to see what this small spider would do. So he named a price he thought impossible. "Bring me 3 things. Bring me Onini, the python who swallows goats whole. Bring me Osebo, the leopard with teeth like knives. And bring me the Moboro, the hornets whose sting brings death. Bring me all 3 alive, and the stories are yours." The other gods laughed. This was impossible. The python was too large to capture, the leopard too fierce, the hornets too many and too deadly. A small spider could never accomplish this. But Anansi simply nodded. "I will return with all 3. He climbed down from the sky and went home. His wife asked what Iyami had said. "He wants me to capture the python, the leopard, and the hornets." His wife thought for a moment. Then she smiled. "Those things can be caught, not with strength, but with cleverness. And you are clever, husband." Together they planned, and the next morning, Anansi found the python first. The great snake, Onini, was resting under a palm tree, longer than 6 men lying end to end, thick as a man's thigh, powerful enough to crush bones. Anansi approached casually, as if out for a morning walk. "Good morning, Onini." The python opened one eye. "Good morning, Anansi." "I've been having an argument with my wife," Anansi said. "She claims you are the longest creature in the forest. I say the bamboo pole by the river is longer. We've been arguing all night." The python's pride was touched. "I am certainly longer than any bamboo pole." "I believe you, but my wife is stubborn. Could you perhaps lie next to the pole so we can measure? Then I can prove to her that I was right." The python, flattered and wanting to prove his length, agreed. Anansi fetched a long bamboo pole, laid it on the ground. The python stretched himself beside it. "Ah," Anansi said, "you are longer, definitely longer. But my wife will say you are not stretched fully straight. She'll say you curved a bit. May I tie you to the pole just to keep you perfectly straight while I measure?" The python, thinking only of proving his length, agreed. Anansi tied him, first at the head, then in the middle, then at the tail. Careful knots, strong vines. By the time the python realized he'd been tricked, it was too late. He was bound completely, unable to move, unable to escape. Anansi carried him to the sky, presented him to Nyami. Here is Onini the python, 1 down, 2 to go. Nyame was impressed, but not convinced. The hornets are many, Anansi, and the leopard is deadly. You may have succeeded once through luck. Watch me, Anansi said. He returned to earth, went into the forest, found the tree where the Moboro hornet lived. Hundreds of them, their nest hanging like a great grey god from the branches. Anansi filled a calabash with water. Then he poured some of the water over his own head. Then he held a large leaf over his head like an umbrella. He walked to the hornet's tree, called up to them. Foolish insects, look at you, getting wet in the rain. The hornets looked around, confused. It wasn't raining. The sky was clear. What rain? They buzzed. This rain, Anansi gestured at the drops falling from his own head. Can't you feel it? A terrible storm is coming. Don't you have sense enough to take shelter? The hornets looked at each other, uncertain. This spider seemed to be wet. Maybe rain was coming. Maybe they couldn't feel it yet, but it was approaching. Where should we shelter? Their leader asked. Anansi held up a large calabash with a small opening. In here, quickly, before the storm gets worse. The hornets, confused and worried, flew into the calabash. Every single one, seeking shelter from a rain that didn't exist. The moment the last hornet entered, Anansi sealed the opening with a banana leaf. He carried the calabash to the sky, presented it to Nyame. Here are the Mboboro hornets. 2 down, 1 to go. Now the other gods stopped laughing. This spider had done the impossible twice. Perhaps he would actually succeed. Nyame said nothing, just waited. Anansi returned to earth. Now came the most dangerous task, Osebo the leopard. The leopard was fierce, smart, strong. He couldn't be tricked by flattery like the python, couldn't be confused like the hornets. But Anansi had a plan. He dug a deep pit along the leopard's path, covered it with branches and leaves, made it invisible. Then he waited. That night, Osebo came prowling, looking for prey. He stepped on the covered pit. The branches broke. He fell deep into the hole, too deep to climb out. Morning came. Osebo was still in the pit, frustrated, angry, roaring. Anansi appeared at the edge of the hole, looked down. Oh, Osebo, what terrible luck! How did you fall into this pit? Never mind how, the leopard snarled. Get me out. Of course, friend. Let me fetch a strong vine. Anansi returned with a long, flexible vine. He lowered one end into the pit. Tie it around your waist, he called down. I'll pull you up. The leopard, desperate to escape, tied the vine around himself. The moment he did, Anansi pulled the other end tight, tied it to a strong tree. The leopard was bound. Anansi bent a young tree down to the ground, tied the leopard to the bent tree, then he caught the vine holding the tree down. The tree sprang upright, with Osebo tied to it, hanging. unable to move, unable to escape. Anansi carried him to the sky, presented him to Nyame. Here is Osebo the leopard, all 3 tasks complete. The stories are mine. Nyame stared at the python, the hornets, the leopard, all captured by a small spider through nothing but cleverness. He opened the golden box. The stories rose up like smoke, like light, like song. They swirled around Anansi, entered him, became part of him. Take them, Nyame said. From this day forward, all stories belong to you. They will be called Anansi stories, spider stories. Whenever people tell tales, they will remember that it was you who brought stories to the world. Anansi returned to earth, and from that day, people had stories. They gathered around fires, told tales of animals and gods, of clever spiders and foolish creatures, of wisdom and folly. All because Anansi, through cleverness, brought the stories down from the sky. The elders say this story teaches many things, that size is not strength, that cleverness can accomplish what force cannot, that the smallest creature can achieve the greatest things. But there are other tales. Tales where Anansi's cleverness doesn't serve him so well, where his tricks backfire, where he learns that outsmarting others sometimes means outsmarting yourself. Let me tell you about the time Anansi tried to hoard all the wisdom in the world. This happened after Anansi brought stories to the world, after he became famous, after everyone knew his name. But fame made Anansi greedy in a new way. He didn't just want stories, he wanted wisdom. He wanted to be the wisest creature in the world. He wanted everyone to come to him for advice, to depend on him, to need him. So Anansi decided he would collect all the wisdom in the world, every piece of knowledge, every lesson, every secret. He would gather it all and keep it for himself. He went from village to village, from forest to river, from mountain to valley. Wherever he found wisdom, he took it, gathered it, put it in a large pot, a calabash with a lid. When people made mistakes and learned from them, Anansi was there to collect that wisdom. When elders shared proverbs, Anansi was there to steal them. When animals discovered new ways of surviving, Anansi was there to take that knowledge. The pot grew heavier, fuller, packed tight with all the wisdom in the world. Finally, Anansi had gathered everything, every piece of wisdom that existed, and he was terrified someone would steal it from him. He decided to hide the pot, somewhere no one would find it, somewhere he alone could access it. He looked around, saw the tallest tree in the forest, a tree so high its top touched the clouds. Perfect, Anansi thought. I'll hide the pot of wisdom at the very top of that tree. No one will ever find it there. He tied the pot of wisdom to his belly with strong cords, so both his hands would be free for climbing. Then he began to climb, but the pot was large and heavy, and it kept banging against the tree trunk. Every time Anansi tried to pull himself up, the pot got in the way, knocked against his chest, threw off his balance. He climbed a few feet, slipped, climbed again, slipped again. The pot of wisdom kept getting in his way, making the climb impossible. Anansi's young son was watching from below. He'd followed his father, curious about what he was doing. "Father," the boy called up, "why don't you tie the pot to your back instead of your belly? Then it won't block your arms." Anansi stopped climbing, looked down at his son. The solution was so obvious, so simple. He was supposed to have all the wisdom in the world in this pot, and yet his young son, with no special wisdom at all, had just solved a problem he couldn't solve. Anansi realized something then, something that made him angry and sad at the same time. He didn't have all the wisdom. He could never have all the wisdom. Wisdom wasn't something you could hoard in a pot. It existed in everyone, in children, in elders, in animals, in experience. You could gather all the knowledge in the world and still someone else would know something you didn't. In frustration, Anansi threw the pot down. It smashed against the ground, shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the wisdom scattered, spread across the world. Some pieces went to the villages, some to the forests, some to the rivers, some to the animals, some to the children. That's why wisdom is found everywhere now, in everyone and everything. Because Anansi tried to hoard it and failed. Because his own son proved that wisdom can't be collected and hidden. The elders say this story teaches that wisdom isn't a thing you can own. It's something that flows, something that grows, something that exists in the most unexpected places. But there are other tales about other creatures, about the tortoise who was clever in his own way, about the leopard, about the monkey, each one with their own stories of trickery and lessons learned. Let me tell you about Ijapa the tortoise. He appears in many stories, almost as many as Anansi. The tortoise was clever too, but where Anansi was quick and agile, the tortoise was slow and patient. His cleverness came from thinking ahead, from planning, from understanding that patience often defeats speed. There was a time when the birds decided to hold a feast in the sky, a great celebration. All the birds were invited. They would fly up together, feast on the finest foods, dance among the clouds. The tortoise heard about this feast and he wanted to attend. But tortoises cannot fly. They have no wings. They are slow creatures of the ground. The tortoise was not discouraged. He went to the birds. "Friends," he said, "I've heard about your wonderful feast. I would very much like to attend." The birds looked at each other. The tortoise was not a bird. He had no wings. How could he possibly attend a feast in the sky? But the tortoise could be very charming when he wanted to be. He praised the birds, complimented their feathers, admired their songs, told them how honored he would be to celebrate with such magnificent creatures. Eventually, the birds agreed. Each bird would contribute one feather. Together, these feathers would make wings for the tortoise. He could fly with them to the feast. The birds each plucked a feather, gave it to the tortoise. He assembled the feathers into beautiful wings, attached them to his shell. When the day came, the tortoise flew with the birds, up and up, into the clouds to where the feast was spread out, tables loaded with food, more food than anyone had ever seen. But before they began eating, the tortoise stood up. "Friends," he said, "at important feasts like this, it is customary for everyone to take a special name, a feast name. In my culture, this brings good luck." The birds had never heard of this custom, but it sounded reasonable. They agreed. "What name will you take?" they asked the tortoise. The tortoise smiled. "I will be called All of You." The birds chose their own feast names. Eagle became Cloud Dancer. Hawk became Wind Rider. Parrot became Rainbow Voice. Each bird picked a name. Now, the tortoise said, "Let us ask our hosts whose food this is." The spirit who had prepared the feast called down, "This food is for all of you." The tortoise turned to the birds. "You heard them. This food is for all of you, and I am called all of you. Therefore, this food is for me." Before the birds could protest, the tortoise began eating. He ate and ate the best dishes, the finest foods. He ate until his belly was round and tight. The birds watched in shock. They had been tricked. The food they'd flown so far to enjoy was being devoured by the tortoise. Finally, angry and humiliated, the birds decided to leave. But first, they each took back their feather. One by one, they plucked their feathers from the tortoise's wings. Without the feathers, he could not fly, could not get down from the sky on his own. The tortoise realized his mistake too late. He'd been so clever in tricking his way into the feast that he hadn't thought about how to get home. He called down to his wife on the ground below. "Wife, bring all the soft things from our house. Blankets, mats, cushions. Pile them up. I need to jump down." But the tortoise's wife was angry with him. She'd heard what he'd done, how he tricked the birds, how he'd been greedy and selfish. Instead of soft things, she brought hard things, stones, pieces of wood, hard clay pots. She piled them up below where her husband was stranded. The tortoise had no choice. He jumped. He hit the hard pile with a tremendous crack. His smooth shell shattered into many pieces. It took medicine men many days to put his shell back together. They glued the pieces, fitted them carefully, did their best to restore him. But the cracks never fully disappeared. To this day, if you look at a tortoise's shell, you can see the pattern, the many lines where the shell was broken and repaired, the marks of his greed and cleverness gone wrong. The elders say this story teaches that cleverness without consideration for others is just selfishness, that tricking your friends eventually leaves you broken, that thinking you're the smartest one in the room often means you've forgotten to plan your way out. There are so many stories like this, so many lessons wrapped in tales of animals and tricksters, each one explaining something about the world, about human nature, about the dangers of greed and the value of community. These are the stories that were told around fires for generations, that helped people understand their world, that made them laugh and made them think. And they continue, story after story, lesson after lesson, passed from elder to child to grandchild, never ending, always teaching. Let me tell you one more about why the hyena laughs. The hyena was not always the laughing creature you know today. In the olden days, the hyena was serious, solemn. He spoke in a deep, dignified voice. He was respected by other animals for his wisdom and his composure. The hyena had a special role in the animal kingdom. He was the keeper of funeral rites. When an animal died, it was the hyena who prepared the body, who spoke the words, who ensured the deceased was treated with proper respect. It was solemn work, important work. The hyena took great pride in it. One day, a great elephant died, the oldest elephant in the forest, the wisest, the most respected. All the animals gathered for the funeral. It would be the biggest ceremony anyone had ever seen. The hyena prepared carefully. He rehearsed his words, made sure every detail was perfect. This funeral had to be flawless. The day came. All the animals gathered. The hyena stood before them, began to speak the funeral words, his voice deep and serious. But then something happened that the hyena had not anticipated. A flea, a tiny flea, had jumped onto the hyena during his preparations. It was crawling across his belly, tickling him. The hyena tried to ignore it, continued speaking the solemn words, but the flea kept moving, kept tickling. The hyena's voice wavered slightly. He coughed, tried to maintain his composure. The flea found a particularly ticklish spot. The hyena felt a laugh bubbling up inside him. He fought it, pushed it down. This was a solemn occasion. He could not laugh, must not laugh, but the flea kept tickling. The hyena couldn't hold it any longer. A laugh escaped, just a small one, a giggle. He stopped himself, looked at the assembled animals with horror. They were staring at him, shocked, offended. Laughing at a funeral? What kind of creature laughs at a funeral? The hyena tried to explain, tried to apologize, but every time he opened his mouth, the tickling sensation made him laugh again. The animals were disgusted. They stripped him of his role, told him he was no longer worthy to be the keeper of funeral rites. He had disrespected the dead, had laughed at the most solemn occasion. The hyena tried to defend himself, but the damage was done. His reputation was ruined. And the worst part was, he couldn't stop laughing. The nervous habit had taken hold. Every time he tried to speak seriously, the memory of that moment came back. The shame, the embarrassment, and he would laugh. Over time, the laugh became permanent. Not a happy laugh, a nervous, embarrassed laugh. The sound of someone who had made a terrible mistake and couldn't escape it. To this day, hyenas laugh. That cackling, almost manic sound, not because they're happy, but because they carry the shame of their ancestor who laughed at a funeral, who lost his dignity over something as small as a flea. The elders say this story teaches that even small things can have lasting consequences, that one moment of losing control can define you forever, that dignity, once lost, is hard to regain. And so the stories go on, story after story, each one teaching, each one explaining, each one helping us understand the world and ourselves. These are the tales of West Africa, of Anansi and the tortoise, of clever schemes and hard lessons, of greed and wisdom, of mistakes and consequences. They were told by the fire, under the stars, with the sounds of the night around the listeners, and they continue to be told, will always be told, because the lessons they carry never grow old. The fire burns low now. The stories drift into silence, and we carry these lessons forward into tomorrow, into the next generation, into dreams. This is Folklore Crypt. There is another tale from those times, from the same forests where Anansi spun his webs and the tortoise walked slowly. A tale not about tricksters, but about a boy who learned that some debts can never truly be repaid. In a village at the edge of the great forest, there lived a boy named Kofi. He was perhaps 12 years old, maybe 13. In those days, people didn't count years the way we do now. You were a child until you weren't. You became an adult when the village decided you had earned it. Kofi had not yet earned it. He was a drummer, the best young drummer the village had ever seen. His hands moved across the drum skin like water flowing over stones. Natural, effortless. When Kofi drummed, people stopped what they were doing to listen. Old women smiled. Children danced. Even the elders nodded in approval. Kofi's father had been a drummer, his grandfather before him. The rhythm lived in Kofi's blood, in his bones. He could hear patterns in everything, in rainfall, in footsteps, in the wind through leaves. Everything was rhythm. Everything was music. The village loved Kofi for his gift, but they also worried about him because Kofi was proud, too proud. He believed his talent made him special, made him better than other boys his age who couldn't drum as well. When other children played, Kofi practiced his drumming. When other boys helped in the fields, Kofi said his hands were too valuable to risk injury. When the elders tried to teach him humility, Kofi smiled and nodded but didn't really listen. His mother saw this pride growing in him like a weed. She tried to warn him. Pride is dangerous, my son. Talent is a gift, not an achievement. The spirits gave you this ability. They can take it away just as easily. Kofi had her words but didn't feel their weight. He was young, talented, beloved. What did he have to fear? One day, a traveling merchant came to the village. He'd been to many places, seen many things. He gathered the villagers and told them about a great festival happening in the capital city. The king himself would be there. Musicians from across the land would compete for the honor of becoming the royal court drummer. The prize was substantial. Gold, a position of honor, a house in the capital, fame that would last generations. Kofi's heart raced when he heard this. Here was his chance, his opportunity to show the world what the village already knew, that he was the greatest drummer of his generation. He announced he would go to the capital, would compete, would win. His mother begged him not to go. You are too young, too inexperienced. The journey is dangerous. The forest between here and the capital is not like the small woods near our village. It's deep, ancient. Things live there that don't follow the rules of the ordinary world. But Kofi wouldn't listen. His father had died when he was small. His mother couldn't stop him. The elders tried to talk sense into him, but Kofi's pride made him deaf to wisdom. He packed a small bag, took his drum, said his goodbyes, and he walked into the forest. For the first day, the journey was easy. The path was clear. The forest was beautiful. Kofi walked and hummed rhythms to himself, planning the performance he would give at the festival, imagining the king's face when he heard such talent. The second day, the path became less clear. The trees grew thicker, the sunlight dimmer. But Kofi wasn't worried. He had a good sense of direction. He kept walking. By the third day, Kofi realized he was lost. The forest had changed around him. The trees were older here, taller. Their trunks were so wide it would take 10 men holding hands to circle them. The air felt different, heavier, like the forest was watching him. Kofi tried to retrace his steps, but every direction looked the same. Trees and more trees, shadows and silence. He called out, "Hello, is anyone there?" The forest swallowed his voice, gave nothing back. Kofi walked for hours, his confidence fading, his pride crumbling. He was just a boy, lost in a forest too big and too old to care about him. As night began to fall, Kofi heard something. Music. Not birdsong, not wind through leaves. Actual music. Drums, flutes, voices singing in harmony. He followed the sound, pushed through undergrowth, climbed over fallen logs. The music grew louder, more beautiful, more complex than any music he'd ever heard. He emerged into a clearing and stopped breathing. In the center of the clearing was a village, but not like any village Kofi had ever seen. The houses were made of living wood, trees shaped into dwellings, growing still, breathing. The paths between houses glowed faintly with a light that came from the ground itself. And the people. They looked almost human, almost, but not. Their movements were too graceful, too fluid, their eyes too bright, their features too perfect. Kofi immediately knew what he was seeing. The forest people, the spirits who lived in the deep woods, the ones his mother had warned him about. He should have run, should have hidden, should have done anything except what he did. But the music drew him forward. He couldn't resist. It was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. He walked into the spirit village. The music stopped immediately. Every spirit turned to look at him. Kofi froze, his drum clutched against his chest. A figure approached, taller than the others, wearing robes that seemed to be made of leaves and moonlight, a crown of twisted branches on his head. The forest king. His voice was like wind through canyons, deep, ancient, amused. A human child in our village. How unusual, how unexpected. Kofi tried to speak. His voice came out as a whisper. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. I'm lost. I heard the music and... The forest king smiled. You heard our music, yes? And what did you think of it? It was the most beautiful music I've ever heard. The king's smile widened. A musician yourself, I see. He gestured to the drum. Will you play for us? This was Kofi's moment. Even lost, even terrified, even standing before spirits who could kill him with a thought, his pride rose up. He could play them, show them what a human could do, prove that even spirit music couldn't match his talent. He positioned his drum, took a breath, and began to play. His hands moved across the drum skin. The rhythm flowed out, complex, beautiful. Everything Kofi had learned, everything he'd practiced, his best performance, his most intricate patterns. When he finished, he looked up, expecting awe, expecting admiration. The forest king was smiling, but it wasn't a kind smile. Impressive for a human child. Your technique is adequate. Adequate? Kofi felt his pride wounded. He was the best drummer in his village, in his region. He'd been told this his whole life. Would you like to hear real drumming? The king gestured. One of the spirit musicians stepped forward, sat at a drum carved from a single piece of wood that seemed to shimmer in the strange light. The spirit began to play. Kofi's heart sank. The rhythm was beyond anything he'd imagined possible. Layers upon layers of sound, patterns within patterns. The drums seemed to speak, to tell stories, to create images in the air. Kofi could see the music.
could see forests growing and seasons changing and rivers flowing, all in the drum beats. It was magic, pure magic, beyond technique, beyond practice, beyond anything human hands could achieve. When the spirit finished, there was silence. The forest king turned back to Kofi. "Still think you're talented, boy?" Kofi couldn't speak, couldn't move. His whole identity had been built on being the best drummer, and in one performance, he'd seen how far he was from true mastery. The king seemed to read his thoughts. "You have potential, raw talent, but you're arrogant. You came into my forest thinking you were special, thinking your small village skills made you important." I'm sorry," Kofi's voice broke. "I didn't know. I didn't understand." "No, you didn't," the king considered him. "But you can learn, if you're willing." "Learn what?" "True rhythm, true music. I can teach you. If you stay here, if you serve me, if you give up your journey to the capital and dedicate yourself to learning from the masters." Kofi thought about the festival, the prize, the recognition. All of it seemed small, meaningless compared to what these spirits could teach him. "How long would I need to stay?" The king shrugged. "Time moves differently here. A day in the spirit world might be a year in yours, or a year here might be a day outside. It's hard to say. And if I agree, then you become my student, my drummer. You serve me until I decide you've learned enough. Then you may leave." Kofi knew he should refuse, knew he should find his way home, knew his mother was probably terrified, knew this was dangerous. But the music, the possibility of learning such magic, of becoming truly great instead of just village great. "I agree," he said. Then the forest king smiled. "Then welcome, student. Your training begins now."
Time became strange for Kofi. He couldn't tell if days were passing or years. The spirit village had no sun to mark time, no seasons to count. Just endless twilight and endless music. The forest king was a demanding teacher. He made Kofi unlearn everything he thought he knew about drumming. Made him start over, like a baby learning to walk. "You play with your hands," the king said. "You need to play with your spirit, your breath, your heartbeat. The drum is not separate from you. It's an extension of your being." Kofi practiced endlessly. His hands bled, healed, bled again. The other spirits watched with amusement. Some offered advice, others mocked his human limitations. But slowly, very slowly, Kofi began to improve. He started to hear what the king was teaching, started to feel rhythm not just as patterns, but as living things, started to understand that music wasn't something you perform. It was something you channeled, something that flowed through you. His pride died during this time, completely, stripped away by failure after failure after failure. He learned humility the hard way, through countless mistakes, through being the worst musician in a village of masters. The forest king watched this transformation, said nothing, just kept teaching. One day, or maybe 1 year, or maybe 1 hour, the king called Kofi to perform. "Show me what you've learned." Kofi sat at the drum, the same drum he'd carried into the forest. But now, it felt different in his hands, alive, connected. He began to play. The rhythm flowed out of him, not from his hands, from somewhere deeper, from the place the king had been trying to teach him to access. The drums sang. The sound filled the clearing. Other spirits stopped what they were doing, listened. Kofi played patterns he'd never practiced, rhythms he'd never heard. They came from somewhere beyond him, through him. The drum was speaking, and he was just the channel. When he finished, there was silence. Then the forest king nodded. Now you understand. Now you're ready. Ready for what? To leave, to go back to your world. Your training is complete. Kofi's heart sank. Of course there was a price. Everything with spirits had a price. What price? You will drum for me. Not here, in your world. Whenever I call, you will play. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, when you feel my summons, you will drum for me. For how long? Until your debt is paid. Until I decide your service has equaled the value of what you've learned. How will I know when that is? You'll know. The king gestured. Now go. The path will open for you. Kofi walked to the edge of the clearing, turned back to look at the spirit village, at the beings who had taught him, at the place where he'd lost his pride and found something better. Then he stepped into the forest. The trees shifted. The path appeared, clear and obvious. He walked. Within an hour, he emerged from the forest, near his village, the same place he'd entered months ago, or years ago, or days ago. He ran home. His mother was hanging laundry. She looked up, saw him, dropped the cloth. Kofi? Her voice was disbelieving. You're alive. Of course I'm alive. How long have I been gone? 3 days? Just 3 days? We were about to send such parties. 3 days? Kofi had spent what felt like years in the spirit village, had learned a lifetime of skills, but only 3 days had passed. He tried to explain where he'd been, what he'd learned, but his mother just held him, crying, relieved he was home. The village welcomed him back, asked about his journey, about the festival. Kofi realized he'd never made it to the capital, had never competed, had failed in his original quest. But somehow he didn't care. The prize seemed meaningless now, the recognition unimportant. He had something more valuable, real knowledge, real skill, and a debt to the forest king. Life returned to normal. Kofi drummed at village celebrations, at festivals, at gatherings. People noticed something different about his playing, a depth that hadn't been there before, a quality that made even the elders stop and listen with respect. Kofi accepted their praise with humility now, knowing how much he still had to learn, knowing how small his talent was compared to the masters. Weeks passed, then months. Then one night, Kofi felt it, a pull deep in his chest, a summons. The forest king was calling. Kofi woke from sleep. The pull was unmistakable, urgent, like a rope tied around his heart, tugging him toward the forest. He got up, took his drum, walked out of the village while everyone slept. The forest welcomed him. The path appeared. He walked deeper and deeper until he reached the clearing, the spirit village. The forest king was waiting, sitting on a throne made of living wood. You came. Good. I need you to drum. For what? Does it matter? You owe me service. I'm collecting. Kofi sat, positioned his drum. What should I play? Whatever the moment requires, you'll know. Kofi began to drum. The rhythm came naturally, flowing from that deep place he'd learned to access. He played for hours, or maybe minutes. Time was strange here. The spirits gathered, listened. Some danced. Some simply absorbed the sound like nourishment. When the king finally gestured for him to stop, Kofi's hands were numb. Good, the king said. You may go. Kofi walked back through the forest, emerged near his village as dawn was breaking, slipped back into his house before anyone noticed he'd been gone. This became the pattern. Once a month, sometimes more, sometimes less, the summons would come. Kofi would go to the forest, would drum for the forest king, would return home. He told no one, not his mother, not his friends. It was his secret, his debt. Years passed. Kofi grew into a man, married, had children, became one of the village elders. His drumming became legendary. People traveled from distant regions to hear him play. But still, the summons came. Still, he walked to the forest. Still, he drummed for the forest king. His wife noticed his absences, asked where he went. Walking, he'd say. I need to think sometimes. She didn't believe him, but didn't press. Everyone has secrets. Kofi's children grew, learned to drum. He taught them with patience and humility, never mentioning his own teacher, never speaking of the forest king. One night, when Kofi was old, gray-haired, his hands marked with a lifetime of drumming, the summons came again. He was tired, so tired. The walk to the forest felt longer than ever. But he went, as he always went. The forest king looked unchanged. Spirits don't age the way humans do. You're old, the king observed. Yes, Kofi's voice was rough with age. I've drummed for you for 40 years. Have you? You know you have. Every month. Sometimes more. I've served you faithfully. Yes, you have. The king stood, approached Kofi. And now your debt is paid. Kofi felt something release in his chest. The invisible rope that had tied him to the forest for decades. Gone. I'm free? You're free. You learned, you served, you remained humble. The debt is settled. Kofi expected to feel relief, joy. Instead, he felt strange, hollow. This had been part of his life for so long. Will I still be able to play the way you taught me? The king smiled. The skill is yours, earned through practice and service. No one can take that from you. But you won't hear my summons anymore. You won't walk these paths again. Never? Not unless you choose to, as a visitor, as a friend, but not as a debtor. Kofi looked around the clearing, at the spirit village, at the place that had shaped so much of his life. Thank you, he said, for the teaching, for the opportunity. The king nodded. Go home, old drummer. Live your remaining years in peace. Your service was valued. Kofi walked back through the forest for the last time as a debtor. The path opened for him as always, but it felt different. final. He emerged near his village as dawn broke. The familiar sight, the familiar sounds. He went home, climbed into bed beside his wife. She stirred. "Where did you go?" For the first time in 40 years, Kofi told the truth. "To the forest, to pay a debt. But it's paid now. I won't go again." His wife looked at him, searching his face. Then she laid her head back down. "Good. You're too old for midnight walks anyway." Kofi lived another 10 years. He drummed at every village celebration, taught his grandchildren, passed on what he'd learned, but he never spoke of the forest king, never told the full story of where his skill came from. When he finally died, old and content, the village mourned. They spoke of his talent, his humility, his dedication. They buried him with his drum. That night, in the deep forest, in a clearing that appeared on no map, the forest king stood, holding a drum. He played a rhythm, complex, beautiful, mournful. The other spirits gathered, listened. It was a funeral song for a human who had been a good student, who had paid his debts, who had learned what pride cost and what humility earned. When the song ended, the king set down the drum, spoke to the assembled spirits. "Remember this one. He walked among us and left better than he came." That is rare, for humans or spirits. The spirits murmured agreement, and the drum was placed in a place of honor, where it remains to this day. A reminder that debts can be paid, that pride can be overcome, that talent without humility is worthless, but talent with humility is magic. The elders say this story teaches many things. That natural talent is just the beginning. That true skill requires humility. That the teachers who are hardest on us often give us the greatest gifts. It teaches that debts must be paid, that shortcuts have costs, that 40 years of service is not too much to pay for a lifetime of mastery. And it teaches that the forest remembers that spirits are not always enemies, that sometimes the thing that seems like a curse is actually a blessing in disguise. Kofi walked into the forest as an arrogant boy. He walked out as a humble student. He spent his life paying a debt, and in doing so, gained more than he could have achieved any other way. These are the old stories, the ones that carry weight, the ones that teach us how to live, how to understand the world, how to navigate the space between pride and humility, between talent and mastery, between the human world and the spirit world. They were told around fires, in the twilight, when the day's work was done and the night stretched ahead, when children gathered close to elders and learned the wisdom of those who came before. And they continued generation after generation, story after story. Anansi with his thin waist, the tortoise with his broken shell, the hyena with his laugh, the drummer boy who learned humility in the forest. Each tale a lesson, each character a mirror, each ending a beginning. The fire has burned down to embers now. The stories drift into the darkness, into memory, into dreams. Carry them with you, these ancient wisdoms, these old warnings, these lessons that never grow old because human nature never changes. The spider still schemes, the tortoise still plans, the hyena still laughs nervously, And somewhere in a forest too deep for maps, a drum sits in a place of honor, waiting, remembering, teaching. And the forest king still walks among the trees, still watches, still listens, still waits for the next proud child who needs to learn that true mastery begins with humility. The stories never end, they just wait for the next fire, the next gathering, the next voice to carry them forward. Before the fire went out, that's when the best stories were told. And now the fire is out, the stories are told, and we rest. This is Folklore Crypt,